Mark and Elena had finally found their dream home after years of searching. It was a modest house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, surrounded by neatly trimmed lawns and friendly neighbors who waved as they passed by. From the outside, everything seemed perfect. The streets were clean, the houses were well kept, and the community had a reputation for being orderly and welcoming. For Mark and Elena, it felt like the ideal place to start a new chapter in their lives together. After years of hard work, sacrifices, and careful planning, this was their chance to settle in a peaceful environment, away from the chaos of the city and the pressures of demanding jobs. The couple had always been careful about the communities they chose to live in. They read reviews, visited at different times of the day, and spoke with neighbors to understand the local atmosphere. When they walked into this neighborhood for the first time, they felt a sense of calm that they hadn't experienced elsewhere. Children played safely in the yards. Neighbors smiled genuinely as they watered their gardens, and everything seemed orderly without feeling restrictive. They had dreamed of this kind of balance, a place where they could feel secure but also free to live their lives without unnecessary interference. It wasn't long after moving in that they became familiar with the local homeowners association. Like most communities, the HOA managed the neighborhood rules, collected fees for maintenance, and coordinated community events. At first, interactions with the HOA were polite and unremarkable. They received newsletters, reminders about trash collection, and invitations to social gatherings. Everything seemed normal, and they were happy to contribute a reasonable monthly fee, knowing it helped keep the neighborhood looking nice. However, not long after settling in, a new challenge appeared. The HOA president, a woman named Karen, had developed a reputation for being extremely strict. While many residents tolerated her strictness, Mark and Elena quickly realized that Karen did not handle resistance well. At first, it seemed like a minor inconvenience, small complaints about garden decor, driveway maintenance, and fence heights. Elena had politely disagreed with some of these requests, explaining her choices calmly and respectfully. Usually, these conversations ended without incident, though Karen's scowl made it clear she was not pleased. Then came the shocking letter. One afternoon, a formal notice arrived in their mailbox, stamped with the HOA's official seal. Mark and Elena sat together at the kitchen table, reading the words carefully. The letter stated that the HOA was imposing a special assessment fee of $250,000 for neighborhood improvements that had never been discussed in any previous meetings. The letter claimed that the couple's share of the fee was mandatory and that failure to pay could result in legal action. At first, Mark thought it must be a mistake. He reread the letter several times, hoping he had misinterpreted the words. $250,000? That was more than the cost of some entire houses in the area. Surely this was some kind of clerical error. Elena, however, read the letter with a calm but firm expression. She had seen enough of bureaucracy and intimidation in her life to know when something smelled suspicious. She suggested they investigate before reacting. Their first step was to check the official HOA documents. They pored over meeting minutes, past notices, and financial statements. Not a single document mentioned a special assessment anywhere close to that amount. There had been minor assessments in the past, but nothing even remotely approaching the scale of $250,000. It quickly became clear that this was not a legitimate fee. It was an attempt to intimidate them, likely because Elena had previously stood her ground on smaller HOA demands. Despite understanding that it was an intimidation tactic, Elena and Mark realized that ignoring it entirely could have consequences. Karen, as HOA president, had authority to make complaints to law enforcement or initiate legal proceedings, even if the claim was baseless. But Elena remained composed. She calmly drafted a polite response to the HOA, stating clearly that the $250,000 fee was unsubstantiated and would not be paid. She attached copies of the relevant documents proving that the assessment had no legal basis. Her tone was firm yet professional. Mark was worried about the potential fallout. He knew Karen had a reputation for escalating conflicts unnecessarily. "Are you sure we should confront her directly?" he asked, nervous. Elena looked at him with a calm confidence that made him pause. "We have the facts," she said. "We are in the right. Standing firm doesn't mean we are being aggressive. It means we are protecting ourselves responsibly." As expected, Karen did not take the refusal lightly. Within days, she showed up at their door unannounced, carrying more paperwork and wearing a look that mixed anger and disbelief. Her presence was intimidating. She stood with her arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. Mark and Elena welcomed her politely but firmly indicated that they had no intention of paying the fee. Karen's voice was sharp as she reiterated the demand, but Elena's calm responses only seemed to frustrate her more. Every time Karen expected Elena to flinch, she held her ground, answering questions with clarity and confidence. What made the confrontation more tense was the knowledge that neighbors were observing from behind curtains and through windows. Some whispered about Karen's aggressive behavior, while others wondered whether the couple would yield to the pressure. But Elena did not act out of anger. She acted out of principle. Her demeanor was steady, her words measured. She explained that the fee was neither fair nor legal, and that any attempt to enforce it without proper authorization could have consequences for the HOA itself. Karen, unaccustomed to being challenged in this way, was visibly rattled. She waved her paperwork as if it alone carried power. But Elena and Mark remained calm. This calmness unnerved Karen further. She had expected fear or submission, not reasoned resistance. As she fumed, Mark noticed the strain in her expression. It was a reminder that sometimes authority is only as strong as the willingness of others to obey blindly. By the end of the visit, Karen left without payment, though she muttered under her breath about taking further action. Mark and Elena closed the door and leaned against each other, relieved that the immediate confrontation had ended peacefully. "This is just the beginning," Mark said, half joking, half serious. Elena nodded. "Perhaps, but we handle it one step at a time. There's no need to panic over someone else's anger. Facts are on our side." That night, the couple reviewed their legal options. They contacted a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes and explained the situation. The attorney confirmed what they already knew. Karen's demand was baseless, and they were under no obligation to pay. More importantly, any attempt by Karen to involve law enforcement without a valid claim could backfire spectacularly. This gave Mark and Elena a sense of security. Even though the situation was stressful, they understood that knowledge, preparation, and calm determination were far more powerful than intimidation. As they prepared for the next day, they realized something important. Their quiet life in the neighborhood had been interrupted not by real danger, but by someone else's desire for control. And in responding with calm, rational, and principled actions, they had already begun to reclaim their peace. Little did they know, the confrontation with Karen was only the first step in a chain of events that would reveal surprising truths, test their resilience, and ultimately expose the limits of authority when faced with integrity. Mark and Elena went to bed that night with a sense of cautious optimism. The house still felt like a sanctuary, even with the looming threat of Karen's next move. They understood that living in a community meant dealing with rules and regulations, but they also understood that no rule or demand could replace reason, fairness, or courage. As they drifted to sleep, they knew one thing clearly. Standing up for what was right, even against someone with apparent power, was never the wrong choice. The following morning, the air in the neighborhood felt unusually heavy. Mark and Elena could sense that the previous day's confrontation with Karen had unsettled more than just themselves. From behind the neatly trimmed hedges, some neighbors peeked through blinds, whispering about the dramatic scene they had witnessed. The couple went about their routine, trying to act normal, but there was a quiet tension that seemed to follow them. Even the birds outside appeared to pause, as if listening to the stress radiating from the house. Elena brewed coffee while Mark checked the mail, half expecting another letter from the HOA. "I wonder how Karen plans to respond," he said cautiously. Elena didn't look up from pouring her cup. "She'll try something," she said calmly. "People like her always do, but we're ready." Her voice carried that quiet authority that made Mark feel both reassured and amazed. Despite the absurdity of the situation, he couldn't help but admire how composed she remained. Where he saw danger and confusion, she saw opportunity to respond wisely. It wasn't long before the first sign of escalation arrived. A patrol car slowly rolled down the street and stopped in front of their house. A uniformed officer stepped out, walking toward their front door with a neutral expression. Mark's stomach sank. "Do you think it's about Karen?" he whispered. Elena nodded, placing a hand on his arm. "Probably. Let's handle it like adults." When the officer reached the door, Elena opened it with a polite smile. "Good morning, officer," she said. "How can we help you today?" The officer nodded, glancing at the paperwork in his hand. "We received a complaint from your homeowners association regarding a special assessment fee," he said carefully. His eyes flicked to Karen, who had somehow appeared behind him, standing on the sidewalk with a look of triumph. "They said you refused to comply." Elena remained calm, her tone even. "The assessment they mentioned is not valid." "We have documentation proving it. I would be happy to provide it to you." She stepped aside, motioning for the officer to enter the house. Mark looked at her in quiet admiration. Her calmness in the face of such a tense situation was remarkable. Karen's jaw tightened, clearly irritated that Elena had not only anticipated the move but was prepared to counter it rationally. Once inside, Elena spread the documents on the kitchen table. The officer reviewed them carefully, flipping through pages, highlighting discrepancies and muttering quietly to himself. Mark watched Karen from the corner of his eye, noticing how her confident facade was beginning to crumble. Her face was pale and she fidgeted nervously as she tried to find words that would make the situation appear legitimate. But the paperwork told the truth. The fee was baseless and the HOA had no grounds to enforce it. Finally, the officer looked up. "Ma'am, I need to ask, are you involved in the military?" he asked Elena. Mark blinked in surprise. Elena raised an eyebrow, her calm demeanor unshaken. "Yes," she replied quietly. "I served for several years and I'm currently in reserve status." The officer's expression changed immediately. His posture straightened and his tone shifted from neutral to respectful. "Ma'am," he said, his voice firmer, "thank you for your service. I understand now why you remain so composed. I will make sure that any further action respects your rights and the law." Mark and Elena exchanged a brief glance. Even he could see the influence Elena carried. Not through intimidation, but through years of disciplined experience and earned respect. Karen, however, did not take this well. She stomped her foot and pointed toward Elena. "This is outrageous. You can't just ignore the HOA rules," she shouted. The officer held up his hand to calm her. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "we are here to investigate claims legally. Any attempt to misrepresent facts or intimidate residents could have consequences for you. I suggest you calm down and allow this process to proceed." Karen's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. She had expected fear, not respect, and she didn't know how to handle it. Mark realized that while the immediate confrontation was under control, Karen would not give up easily. She had a habit of escalating situations, and he suspected she might try more aggressive measures, such as calling additional authorities or rallying other HOA members. Elena, sensing his concern, reached for his hand. "We respond with facts, not fear," she said softly. "Karen's behavior will expose itself in time. There is no need to fight fire with fire." Her words carried a quiet power that steadied Mark's nerves. Over the next few days, the situation developed further. Karen attempted to gather signatures from other residents to support her claim, but she found it difficult. Many neighbors were aware of her aggressive tactics and didn't trust her judgment. Some even confided in Mark and Elena, explaining past experiences of being unfairly pressured. The couple, however, chose not to engage in gossip or retaliatory actions. Instead, they focused on staying informed, documenting every interaction, and maintaining a calm presence in the neighborhood. Elena also contacted a local attorney specializing in HOA disputes to ensure that all their legal bases were covered. The attorney confirmed that the HOA had no authority to enforce such an assessment without proper approval and documentation. He advised them to continue being polite but firm and to document all communications. This professional guidance provided additional reassurance. Mark felt a wave of relief. "It's like we're fighting a battle with paperwork," he joked. Elena smiled. "Yes, but it's a battle we are fully prepared for." Despite the tension, Mark and Elena refused to let Karen's actions dominate their lives. They continued their routines, gardening, cooking, walking in the neighborhood, and interacting with neighbors while staying vigilant. Their calm approach slowly started to influence the community. Some neighbors began speaking more openly about Karen's unreasonable behavior, realizing they weren't alone. The couple's integrity and composed handling of the situation earned them quiet admiration. One afternoon, Karen decided to make another dramatic attempt. She showed up at their door with more paperwork and a group of neighbors she hoped would intimidate them. Mark opened the door cautiously, but Elena stepped forward, calm and collected. "Good afternoon," she said politely. "We've reviewed the documents and we are confident that our position is correct. If you have any new information, we will be happy to review it. Otherwise, there is nothing further to discuss." Karen's group looked uncertain. They had expected conflict, fear, or hesitation, but instead they faced quiet authority and reasoned logic. Elena didn't raise her voice, didn't threaten, and didn't act defensively. Yet her presence alone communicated strength. Karen could feel the respect that others, including the officer, instantly recognized. Her confidence began to crumble as the realization set in. Intimidation would not work here. This was a turning point. Karen's attempts to pressure Mark and Elena had started to fail, not because of luck, but because of their preparation, calmness, and integrity. The neighbors watching from nearby yards began whispering to one another, noting how Elena handled herself with composure and authority. Word started spreading quietly, creating a subtle shift in the neighborhood's perception of Karen's leadership. At night, as Mark and Elena sat on their porch, sipping tea and listening to the quiet hum of the neighborhood, they reflected on the events. "It's exhausting," Mark admitted, "but I feel like we're doing the right thing." Elena nodded. "Yes, the moment you lose sight of integrity, you lose control. Facts, preparation, and calmness will always win over fear and intimidation." Their quiet conversation reflected a deeper understanding. Power is not about aggression. It is about confidence, knowledge, and the courage to stand firm in what is right. Little did they know, the situation with Karen would continue to escalate in unexpected ways. The couple was prepared for confrontation, but the next events would test not just their patience, but also the neighborhood's willingness to uphold fairness and respect. Their lives were about to intersect with authority in a way they had never imagined, an encounter that would redefine the balance of power and respect in their community. For now, however, Mark and Elena had won small victories. They had maintained their dignity, protected their home, and earned the quiet respect of those around them. In a world where bullying often went unchecked, their calm resolve stood as a reminder that courage, preparation, and integrity could turn even the most intimidating challenges into opportunities for justice and respect. The morning began quietly, with the sunlight streaming through the living room windows, but Mark and Elena could feel the tension lingering from the previous days. Despite their cautious optimism, both knew that Karen, the HOA president, was unlikely to accept her failures quietly. Her persistence had already shown that she would escalate the situation if given the chance. For Mark and Elena, the uncertainty of what might happen next created a mix of anticipation and nervousness, but they approached the day with careful determination. Elena reviewed the documents once more, making sure every detail of the HOA's demands and her responses was properly recorded. Mark moved through the house, making sure the security cameras and door locks were functioning. They wanted to be prepared for any encounter, whether it involved paperwork, neighbors, or even law enforcement. While their actions were practical, there was also an underlying strategy: to remain calm, firm, and composed no matter what happened. Their past experiences had taught them that maintaining a steady demeanor often diffused tension before it could escalate further. By late morning, a patrol car slowly approached their house again. Mark felt a familiar knot in his stomach. "Here we go," he muttered, though his voice lacked panic. Elena, sensing his unease, placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Remember facts and composure. That is our advantage," she said. Her quiet confidence never failed to calm him. The officer stepped out of the car with a professional, neutral expression, holding a folder of papers. Karen trailed behind him, a small smile of expectation on her face, as if she already imagined the couple surrendering to her demands. Her followers, neighbors who had been persuaded to support her, stood on the sidewalk whispering among themselves. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the final confrontation. But what she did not anticipate was the presence of someone who demanded not submission, but respect. When the officer approached the front door, Elena opened it immediately, greeting him with a calm, polite smile. "Good morning, officer. Please come in," she said. The officer nodded and stepped inside, his eyes scanning the living room briefly before settling on the documents spread neatly on the kitchen table. Karen followed behind, her expression a mixture of frustration and disbelief that Elena had taken command of the situation so seamlessly. Elena gestured to the papers. "These contain all relevant information about the HOA's claim. As you can see, the $250,000 assessment has no legal or procedural basis. The officer leaned over the table, reviewing the documents carefully. He murmured under his breath, clearly impressed with the clarity and organization of the information presented. Mark watched Karen fidget, her confidence visibly cracking as she realized that intimidation alone would not carry her through this encounter. Then, almost casually, the officer asked, "Ma'am, are you currently serving in the military or have you served before?" Elena looked up from the documents, her calm gaze meeting his. "Yes," she said quietly. "I served for several years and continue to serve in a reserve capacity." The officer's posture changed instantly. His shoulders straightened, his tone shifted, and his demeanor became noticeably respectful. "Ma'am," he said, addressing her with a firmness and attention that was different from before. "Thank you for your service. I understand now why you remain so composed and confident in this situation." Mark glanced at Elena in amazement. Even he felt the authority in her presence, the way respect followed naturally from her quiet command. Karen, however, did not take this revelation well. She pointed at Elena, her voice rising with irritation. "This is absurd. You can't just ignore the HOA rules because of some past experience." The officer held up a hand calmly, cutting her off. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "we are here to investigate the facts, not to enforce a demand that has no legal standing. Any attempt to misrepresent facts or intimidate residents could lead to consequences for you and the HOA. I suggest you remain calm and allow the process to proceed." Karen's face flushed with embarrassment and fury. She had expected compliance, not respect and accountability, and she didn't know how to respond. Mark realized that, while the immediate confrontation seemed under control, Karen would not give up easily. Her pattern of behavior showed that she thrived on escalating conflicts. But Elena's calmness and careful preparation meant that Karen's attempts to intimidate would only expose her own missteps. Elena noticed Mark's concern and placed a steady hand on his arm. "We respond with facts, not emotion. The truth always wins in situations like this," she said softly, reinforcing both his confidence and their shared strategy. Over the next hour, the officer went through the documents, verifying signatures, dates, and correspondence. He asked questions politely but firmly, clarifying details with both Mark and Elena. Karen, meanwhile, grew increasingly impatient. She tried to interrupt several times, pointing to supposed errors in the paperwork, but the officer gently but firmly ignored her outbursts, keeping the focus on the verified facts. Every interruption only highlighted her frustration, and it became increasingly clear that the HOA president's authority was collapsing under the weight of truth. The couple also noticed the subtle reactions of the neighbors standing outside. Many whispered among themselves, casting doubt on Karen's credibility. Some even shook their heads, realizing that they had been influenced by her aggressive demeanor rather than by reason or fairness. Mark felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. Not only were they protecting themselves, but they were also helping others see the importance of fairness and calm, fact-based action. Eventually, the officer looked up from the documents and said firmly, "Ma'am, the assessment fee demanded by your HOA has no legal standing. The couple is correct in refusing to pay it. Furthermore, any further false claims or attempts to intimidate them could result in serious consequences for the HOA and its leadership." Karen's face turned red with fury, but she realized that her position had been officially undermined. Her attempts to manipulate the situation had failed. At that moment, Elena's calm authority reached its peak. She did not gloat, nor did she raise her voice. She simply looked at Karen and said, "We are happy to cooperate with any legitimate requests. However, attempts to intimidate or demand fees without proper authorization are not acceptable." Her words carried both finality and composure. Karen flinched, realizing that she could no longer control the narrative. The officer nodded in agreement, subtly signaling the end of the confrontation. Mark exhaled, feeling a release of tension that had built over days. Elena, however, remained alert, understanding that Karen's reaction would not stop at embarrassment. There might be further attempts to sway neighbors, file complaints, or create additional challenges. But for now, the critical confrontation had been resolved. Their preparedness, calm demeanor, and adherence to facts had protected them and reinforced the principle of fairness. As the officer prepared to leave, he offered a few final words of advice. "Ma'am," he said to Elena, "it is clear that you understand your rights and responsibilities. Continue to document all interactions and remain calm. The law and fairness will always favor reason over intimidation." Elena nodded politely, expressing her gratitude without arrogance. Karen left shortly after, her entourage of neighbors in tow, all subdued by the authority displayed by Elena and the officer's recognition of her credibility. After the officer drove away, Mark and Elena sat down in the living room, taking a moment to process everything that had just happened. "I can't believe how smoothly that went given how tense it felt," Mark admitted. Elena smiled faintly. "It went smoothly because we stayed prepared, calm, and focused on facts. That is the difference between fear and control." Her words were a lesson not only for Mark, but for anyone who might face unreasonable demands in life. The neighborhood, meanwhile, began to respond quietly to the events. Some neighbors reached out to Mark and Elena privately, expressing relief that someone had stood up to Karen's unfair tactics. Others quietly questioned the HOA's methods, realizing that intimidation and aggression were not the foundations of a healthy community. The couple's composure had created a ripple effect, slowly shifting the balance of respect and fairness in the neighborhood. By the end of the day, the couple had achieved a small but meaningful victory. They had maintained their dignity, protected their home, and reinforced the principle that truth and preparation always outweighed intimidation and aggression. Mark and Elena understood that this was not just about a $250,000 fee. It was about the values that defined how they would live in their home and interact with their community. As night fell, the house returned to its peaceful state, with the gentle hum of suburban life outside. Mark and Elena reflected on the day's events, recognizing the importance of composure, preparation, and integrity. They knew that Karen might still try to assert her authority in other ways, but they were ready. More importantly, they had discovered that standing firm in truth and fairness could turn even the most intimidating confrontation into an opportunity for respect, understanding, and quiet influence. The following morning, the neighborhood seemed unusually quiet, as if it were holding its breath. Mark and Elena sensed that the confrontation with Karen was far from over. Even though the officer had clearly sided with them and verified the illegitimacy of the $250,000 assessment, Karen's stubbornness and desire for control meant that she would not give up easily. Elena, as always, remained calm, carefully planning their next steps while Mark quietly prepared for whatever might happen. Karen, true to form, wasted no time. She arrived at their house once again, this time bringing a stack of additional papers and looking even more determined than before. Her expression carried a mix of anger and desperation. It was clear that she had realized her previous tactics had failed, and she was now attempting something more aggressive. Mark and Elena could feel the tension building before she even spoke a word. Karen knocked firmly on the door, and when Elena opened it, she did so with the same calm, polite composure she had maintained in every encounter. "Good morning, Karen. How can we assist you today?" she asked evenly. Karen waved the papers, pointing at them dramatically. "This is unacceptable. You will pay the fee. You have no choice," she exclaimed. Mark instinctively stepped slightly behind Elena, ready to support her if necessary, but Elena's steady presence reassured him that they were in control. Elena gestured for Karen to step inside, keeping her voice calm. "We are happy to review any legitimate documentation," she said. "But as we have already shown, your demands are not legally enforceable. We are prepared to cooperate with any legitimate requests." Karen hesitated for a moment, clearly frustrated that her intimidation tactics were not working, but she pressed on, trying to make her presence feel more threatening. It was at that moment that another unexpected arrival changed the course of the confrontation entirely. A second officer, who had been dispatched to follow up on Karen's repeated complaints, stepped out of his vehicle. He approached the house quickly, his demeanor professional but alert. As soon as he saw Elena, his posture shifted dramatically. He straightened to attention and spoke in a sharp, respectful tone. "Yes, General. How would you like us to proceed?" Mark froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. Elena, however, remained calm, her composure unwavering. Karen's face turned from anger to complete shock. She had not anticipated this revelation. The officer, recognizing Elena's military service, immediately treated her with the respect and authority due to her rank. Mark realized that her previous calm authority was not just personality, It was a reflection of years of disciplined experience that commanded respect even from law enforcement. Elena's response was measured. "Thank you. Please ensure that any interactions today remain professional and lawful. I want to make certain that this neighborhood dispute is handled appropriately and that no false claims are made." Her words carried the same quiet authority she had used throughout the previous confrontations, but now backed by official recognition of her service and rank. Karen's reaction was immediate and chaotic. She waved her papers and tried to assert control over the situation, but the officers, understanding the legality and seriousness of Elena's position, did not respond to her theatrics. The second officer spoke firmly. "Ma'am, it has been confirmed that the assessment fee is invalid. Any further attempts to intimidate residents or misrepresent the situation could lead to serious consequences for the HOA and its leadership." Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. This was not how she had expected the encounter to unfold. Elena maintained her calm demeanor, addressing both Karen and the officer in a measured tone. "We are prepared to cooperate with any lawful, documented requests from the HOA. However, repeated attempts to pressure residents into paying invalid fees are unacceptable and will not be tolerated." Mark watched as Karen's confidence crumbled further, her aggressive stance weakening with each word. It was clear that she had underestimated both Elena's resolve and the respect she commanded. The neighbors, who had begun gathering outside to witness the confrontation, whispered among themselves. Many had been skeptical of Karen's authority even before this event, but seeing the officers respond to Elena with such respect caused a visible shift. People exchanged quiet glances, realizing that the woman they had viewed as just another neighbor was actually someone with extraordinary experience and integrity. The quiet authority Elena exuded had not only disarmed Karen, but also reshaped the perception of power in the neighborhood. Karen, however, was unwilling to accept defeat quietly. She attempted to escalate the matter further by insisting on legal action against Mark and Elena. The officers listened calmly, reviewing the situation carefully. After verifying all documentation and the HOA's lack of legal standing, they firmly informed Karen that any such action would be without merit and could result in consequences for her personally. For the first time, Karen appeared genuinely intimidated. She realized that her attempts at intimidation were not only failing, but also potentially putting her in legal jeopardy. Elena, seeing the situation stabilize, decided to offer a way for Karen to exit gracefully. "Karen," she said, her tone still calm but firm, "if the HOA wishes to function properly, it should prioritize fairness, clarity, and honesty. This confrontation does not need to continue. The best way forward is for you to withdraw these invalid claims and focus on legitimate responsibilities." Karen's face reflected a mixture of frustration and reluctant acknowledgement. For the first time, she seemed to understand that her position of authority had limits, and that her actions were being challenged not by anger, but by truth and competence. The officers left shortly after, providing clear guidance that any further attempts by the HOA to enforce the $250,000 fee would be considered harassment. Karen was left standing on the porch, papers in hand, flanked by neighbors who were now beginning to question her leadership. Mark and Elena closed the door behind them, letting out a quiet sigh of relief. While the confrontation had been intense, it was clear that they had maintained control throughout, guided by preparation, composure, and authority. Over the next several days, word of the encounter spread quietly but quickly. Neighbors began reaching out, expressing admiration for how Elena had handled the situation. Some admitted they had long been frustrated with Karen's behavior but had felt powerless. Seeing someone approach the challenge with such calmness and authority inspired them. The neighborhood began to shift subtly, with conversations turning to fairness, respect, and community responsibility rather than fear of arbitrary power. Mark and Elena, however, did not let this newfound recognition distract them. They continued to document interactions, keep records of communications, and maintain their calm presence. They understood that power often reveals itself in small, consistent actions rather than dramatic moments. By remaining steady, they demonstrated that integrity, preparation, and quiet authority could create real change, even against someone as aggressive as Karen. Karen, in contrast, struggled to regain her footing. Her repeated attempts to enforce the fee had failed publicly, and her credibility among neighbors began to erode. The officer's recognition of Elena's authority had highlighted Karen's overreach and reinforced the principle that intimidation cannot replace reason. She attempted to rally a few loyal neighbors, but many quietly declined to support her aggressive tactics, recognizing that the true authority in this situation was rooted in fairness and preparation. By the end of the week, the situation had reached a resolution, at least temporarily. Mark and Elena had defended their home, protected their rights, and demonstrated that calm, prepared, and principled action could overcome intimidation. Karen, meanwhile, was forced to step back and reconsider her approach. The neighborhood, having witnessed these events firsthand, began to reevaluate what leadership and authority truly meant. That evening, Mark and Elena sat together on their porch, reflecting on the lessons of the past week. "I never imagined it would come to this," Mark said quietly. "I thought she would never stop." Elena smiled, a calm, assured expression on her face. "It's not about stopping her," she said. "It's about standing firm, being prepared, and letting truth guide every action. That is how we maintain control and integrity." Mark nodded, feeling a deep respect not only for Elena's experience, but also for her ability to inspire confidence and fairness without raising her voice or resorting to anger. The events of this confrontation would remain in the neighborhood's memory for months. It was not just about the $250,000 fee, but about the way authority, preparation, and integrity had reshaped the dynamics of power in the community. Mark and Elena had demonstrated that courage and composure, combined with knowledge and principle, could challenge even the most persistent intimidation. Though they knew Karen might attempt further challenges in the future, the couple had achieved a pivotal victory. They had maintained their dignity, reinforced their rights, and earned the respect of the community and law enforcement alike. It was a turning point, a moment that would influence not just the couple but the broader neighborhood culture, showing that true authority arises from fairness, knowledge, and calm resolve rather than fear or aggression. After the intense confrontations with Karen and the HOA, life slowly began to return to normal for Mark and Elena. The neighborhood streets were quiet again, children played safely in yards, and the daily routines resumed without the looming tension of legal threats or intimidation. However, the couple knew that the events of the past weeks had left a lasting impression. It wasn't just about standing up against an unfair fee. It was about demonstrating the values of integrity, courage, and calm authority in the face of unreasonable pressure. Elena and Mark spent the morning organizing their home and reviewing all the documentation from their encounters. Every letter, email, and note had been carefully cataloged. The officers' statements and confirmations had been filed and safely stored. Mark looked over the paperwork, amazed at how much effort had gone into protecting themselves and yet grateful that their careful preparation had paid off. "I never realized how much work it takes to stand up to someone like Karen," he admitted. Elena smiled softly. "It's not about the effort," she said. "It's about being ready. Knowledge and calmness are stronger than fear or intimidation." News of the confrontation spread quietly through the neighborhood. Many neighbors who had previously felt powerless under Karen's rule began to approach the couple. Some expressed admiration, while others quietly shared stories of past experiences with the HOA that had left them feeling frustrated or bullied. It became clear that Karen's aggressive tactics had affected more people than anyone had realized. Mark and Elena listened carefully, offering reassurance but not judgment. Their approach was calm, empathetic, and constructive, encouraging neighbors to speak up respectfully and truthfully if similar issues arose. As more neighbors became aware of the events, the community began to shift subtly. People started questioning Karen's leadership and the legitimacy of her previous demands. Some residents approached the HOA board, requesting transparency and proper documentation for any future assessments. Others formed informal groups to ensure that communication within the community was fair and accurate. Mark and Elena observed these changes with quiet satisfaction, realizing that their calm persistence had sparked a broader awareness of fairness and accountability. Karen, meanwhile, struggled to regain her authority. Her repeated attempts to intimidate the couple had failed publicly, and the officer's recognition of Elena's status and composure had highlighted the flaws in Karen's approach. Her influence among neighbors began to diminish, as more residents realized that leadership grounded in intimidation and arbitrary authority was ineffective. Karen tried to assert herself in small ways, sending emails and posting notices, but her words were met with skepticism. The neighborhood had learned to question authority, and Karen's credibility was no longer absolute. Elena and Mark continued to live their lives quietly, focusing on their routines and their community. They walked through the neighborhood, greeted neighbors, and attended local events with the same composure they had shown throughout the ordeal. Their actions spoke louder than words, demonstrating that respect and authority come from integrity and fairness rather than fear or aggression. The couple became informal role models within the neighborhood, showing that standing firm on principle could have a positive impact on an entire community. One afternoon, as they were watering their garden, a neighbor approached them with a small smile. "I just wanted to say thank you," the neighbor said. "I've seen how you handled everything with Karen, and it's inspired me to stand up for myself too. I used to feel intimidated, but now I realize that calmness and preparation can make a difference." Elena nodded politely, appreciating the sentiment without seeking attention. "We all have to work together to make the neighborhood fair and safe," she said. "Courage doesn't have to be loud. It just needs to be consistent." The couple also reflected privately on what they had learned. Mark admitted that he had initially been worried about potential escalation, but he realized that Elena's calm and prepared approach had turned what could have been a stressful ordeal into a manageable challenge. "I've learned so much about patience and strategy," he said. Elena smiled. "It's not about winning a battle," she said. "It's about ensuring that the right principles guide every action. When truth and fairness are on your side, intimidation has no power." As the weeks passed, the neighborhood slowly transformed. Residents began holding more transparent meetings, sharing information openly and encouraging cooperation rather than fear. Karen's attempts to assert control became less frequent, and she gradually faded into the background of community life. While she remained an HOA member, her influence had been significantly reduced. The lessons from the confrontation with Mark and Elena had created a lasting change. The community now understood that leadership must be grounded in fairness, honesty, and respect. Mark and Elena also realized that their experience had strengthened their own bond. Facing such intense pressure together required trust, communication, and mutual support. They learned to anticipate each other's reactions, complement each other's strengths, and maintain a unified front in the face of challenges. Their home, once simply a place to live, had become a symbol of resilience, preparation, and integrity. Neighbors continued to seek guidance, advice, and reassurance from the couple. Many had faced minor disputes, misunderstandings, or small conflicts with Karen or the HOA in the past. Seeing how Mark and Elena handled a significant and potentially overwhelming situation gave them confidence to approach challenges calmly and with evidence rather than emotion. The couple's influence quietly fostered a culture of fairness and accountability in the neighborhood. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with soft shades of orange and pink, Mark and Elena sat together on their porch reflecting on everything that had happened. "It's incredible how much has changed," Mark said softly. Elena nodded. "It shows that integrity and preparation can create real change. Standing firm doesn't have to be confrontational. It just has to be consistent." The couple felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not from victory over Karen, but from knowing that they had made a positive difference in their community. Their story soon became an example for other neighborhoods. Residents shared it quietly with friends and family, emphasizing the lessons of calm authority, preparation, and integrity. The encounter with Karen had started as a personal challenge, but it evolved into a broader reminder that fairness, knowledge, and courage could influence entire communities. Mark and Elena never sought recognition. Their goal had always been to protect their home and uphold their principles, yet their actions resonated far beyond their own lives. In time, Karen's influence waned completely. The HOA board adopted more transparent policies, ensuring that residents had access to all information before any assessments or demands were made. The neighborhood became a model of fairness, communication, and cooperation, and Mark and Elena were quietly credited by those who knew the full story. The couple continued their lives with the same calm routines, now confident that they had not only protected themselves but also strengthened their community for the future. Looking back, the couple realized that the ordeal had taught them lessons far beyond the specifics of the $250,000 fee. They had learned the value of preparation, the importance of remaining calm under pressure, and the power of integrity in influencing others. Most importantly, they understood that true authority does not come from aggression or intimidation. It comes from respect, fairness, and the courage to stand firm in one's principles. As they watched the neighborhood settle into a peaceful evening, Mark and Elena felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Their home had become a safe haven, not just from unfair demands, but as a symbol of integrity and resilience. The community around them had been transformed subtly but meaningfully, guided by the example they had set through their calm, principled actions. The experience left a lasting impression on the couple. They knew that challenges could arise at any time, but they also knew that with preparation, calmness, and integrity, they could handle even the most difficult situations. Their story became a quiet legend among the neighbors, a reminder that courage does not always need to be loud, and that fairness and truth will ultimately prevail over intimidation and false authority. Mark and Elena continued to live peacefully, walking through their neighborhood with quiet confidence, engaging with neighbors respectfully, and maintaining the harmony they had fought to protect. The lessons they had learned from their confrontation with Karen were now part of their daily lives, guiding them in every interaction and decision. They had faced a significant challenge and emerged not just unscathed, but stronger, wiser, and more respected by those around them. Ultimately, the story of Mark and Elena's stand against Karen became a testament to the power of preparation, calmness, and integrity. It was a reminder that standing up for what is right, even in the face of intimidation, can create meaningful change. Their neighborhood, once quietly dominated by fear and control, became a community defined by fairness, respect, and collaboration, a lasting legacy of courage and principled action that would be remembered for years to come.